the knives and tools that it's useful to have to get started cooking, let's learn to use them safely. So the first thing I want to show you is preparing your cutting board. So I have a mat underneath. You can use a towel. Sometimes you have to dampen it a bit. It can be a paper towel, any thin towel. But the goal is just that really when you put your hands down on your cutting board and you try and I'm pushing out and away from me, pushing to the side, pushing a few different directions, it's not budging. There's no wiggling because you want to really reduce any amount of rolling, wiggling of anything having to do with the things that you're chopping or the tools that you're using to chop. And that's going to prevent slipping and cutting yourself. And then we need to learn to hold our knife safely and in a way that's going to make it efficient for us to cut. One of the things that gets in the way of people cooking a lot is just not being efficient with their chopping and prepping. So I really hope that these knife skills videos will help you to get more comfortable in the kitchen and realize that you can get in there, get some veggies or fruit, maybe some herbs chopped up quickly for a dish that maybe otherwise you wouldn't have done because you thought, oh, that's just too much time to prep. So I'm going to grab my knife. I pick it up, make sure that most of my fingers are on the handle, and then people have a variety of ways that they hold their knife. So some people will hold the base of the handle here right before the blade starts and use that to stabilize. Other people keep all their fingers on the handle. I like to have my first finger and thumb just right at that base to help stabilize my knife when I'm chopping. What you want to try to avoid, although it's not unsafe, it just can cause some blisters and things on your finger, is if you're moving your fingers up and having your fingers actually on the blade itself. This is kind of an edge. It's not sharp, but there is a definite edge there, and so just a lot of rubbing back and forth after hours of chopping will tend to cause issues. So we have our knife. The other thing that we'll do is we want to tuck our fingers under. So most people, when I see them starting to chop, they have their fingers out, they're holding onto something, like this and chopping away. And it's only a matter of time before those fingers slip and you cut the edge of your finger. So you want to keep your fingers tucked in, and that's really unnatural for people to do. So usually the first entire session of a cooking class when I'm teaching beginner cooks is I walk around and say, tuck under your fingers, make a claw, and keep your fingers out of the way of the knife. And after about 2 to 3 sessions, I really find that I don't need to remind people anymore. So it's unnatural at first, but you will feel like it becomes natural quite quickly. So let's go ahead and chop, and I'll demonstrate this technique here. So there are different schools of thought with chopping the onion. You want to generally keep the root end intact. So this is the part your onion was growing in the ground. This would be roots coming down. The green part would be coming up here. This is the end that will hold all the leaves of the onion together, or the layers of the onion together. And so, but there's some dirt and other matter in there. So I like to just barely shave it off. What you don't want to do though is cut where you lose that darker area there. The root is still there. We just have shaved off those little pieces coming off to make it cleaner when we're chopping. And then this end you don't have to be that worried about. This end is not anything that's going to help with the structural integrity of your onion when you're chopping. I want to point out one other thing I have here is a scrap bowl. So I like to keep a bowl here so I'm not constantly shifting my position. You want to be efficient with your movements in the kitchen. It will help make you faster. It will help prevent you from accidentally turning with your knife and harming someone in your kitchen. Should mention, if you are going to walk around with your knife, it's best to carry it pointed down at the ground at your side, and so that you can't turn and hit any. You don't want to be turning and hitting anyone with a knife like this. You want to have it down at your side. Tend to put it right against my leg, which I know you can't see, but I just hold it right against my leg. And when you walk behind people, you would say sharp behind. When you have a hot pan, you would say hot behind. If you have anything dangerous in the kitchen, you want to have clear, consistent language that you use to notify people around you so that they don't get cut or burned. So I have my knife here. The other tool I have is you can, when you're just doing a few little things that you're chopping, you can just pull that off, put that in the scrap bin. But I also have a scraper. There's really inexpensive plastic ones. There's bench scrapers that are used more for baking. Either of these is fine. You just want something that you're going to be able to quickly clean off your board. Because once it's wet, it's messy, there's things stuck on there. Besides getting your ingredients mixed up, it just, keeping a messy workspace is another thing that might contribute to you getting hurt, injured, or just not having the outcome you want with cooking. So now I have my root end up, the part that would have the greens coming out of it down, and then I'm just going to cut directly straight down through the root end. And then you have 2 halves. Having that root attached is going to hold the onion together when we're doing the other chopping that I'll show you in a moment. If you cut too deeply into the root end or accidentally cut it off, you'll notice that your onion leaves or layers are sliding around. I'm just pulling off that outer piece of the onion. If you're not going to use all of your onion, it's best to pull this off anyway, this brown part, and then store it in a baggie or container in the fridge. Removing that brown part is going to help your onions stay good longer, and you'll get soggy and mushy less quickly. So we have our 2 halves of the onion. I'm going to be cutting the end that the greens were coming out of and not cutting the root end. So as much as you can avoid cutting through the root end, the cleaner and neater this is going to be, and safer. So I usually pull my onion back on my cutting board. I tend to cut closer to my body, but not at myself. It just gives me some more control. When you're working way out here away from your body, then you don't have as much control and there's more likely to slip. So I'm going to cut into my onion. First I'll do a small dice. So a small dice is a 1/4 inch dice, or 1/4 inch squares. So what I'll do is I'll take my knife and I'll just cut 1/4 inch above the cutting board. I'm going to do this slowly for demonstration purposes. If you do it quickly, you don't have to saw. You'll find out whether you have sharp knives immediately doing this. If you really can't cut in, or you feel like you're really sawing, or it feels like, oh, at any moment it's going to go through and slip, your knives aren't sharp enough to do this, so don't chop like this. Chop in whatever way you can where your fingers are tucked under and you're not chopping at yourself at all, and you're not going to slip, even if it means it's not as neat. When you get a chance to get your knives sharpened, certainly do that, and then you can go ahead and try this technique. So I have my first layer here. So I'm just going to make more cuts about 1/4 inch apart until I can't make any more. And I'll show you what that looks like when I'm done. Okay, so you can see I have 1/4 inch layers there. And then you can see if I try to do it here, I mean, you maybe could get one more, but you'd be really close to your finger, so better just to be safe. Now I'm going to do 90-degree cuts. So if you can see that, I'm going to go 90 degrees downward. And I'm not going to start at the very edge of the onion measuring out. I'm going to actually start at the edge of my top layer, because the layers of the onion already are going to naturally come apart. And I'm avoiding cutting through this root end. So I'm just going just right up to it and not through. Okay, so we have our 1/4 inch cuts. Maybe I can get one more in there. Okay, and then now I'm going to turn it, and then we'll do 1/4 inch this way, and then we'll have our nice 1/4 inch squares. That will be our small dice. Okay, and I'll do it a little more slowly where I'm walking my fingers back so you can see that in a moment, but you can see that we have all these beautiful 1/4 inch pieces of onion. And so I'll take my handy scraper here, just move those off to the side. When you get quick at this, you can very quickly get through a lot of onions. So, and then I still have this root end. You could use this for a stalk. You could, cut the rest of the root off and use it in anything where you're going to chop it up in a food processor. You can get rid of it, whatever you want to do. All right, so I'll do the same thing, same size, a little bit more slowly, just so you can see how I'm tucking my fingers under. So let me get the first sets of layers cut in there. So I'm doing 1/4 inch slices. You can see I'm cutting away from my body, so I'm never cutting toward my stomach in case I slip. All right, and then so we have our 1/4 inch again. So now I have my fingers tucked under, have my knife against it, against those first 2 knuckles like I showed you, and cutting straight down again at 1/4 inch intervals. And what I'm doing is I'm crawling my fingers back. I'm kind of doing this sort of motion, like a creepy crawly. We're walking my fingers back. And then I'm actually using the tips of my fingers to hold the onion in place so it doesn't slide around. And that's what I do whether I'm chopping onions or pretty much anything else. The other reason why we didn't leave the onion whole to do this is you can imagine that if you're trying to cut something in nice even layers, it's rolling around, it's pretty challenging. Anytime you have a round vegetable or fruit or anything else that you're trying to chop, you want to try to make a nice flat side to keep it stable. Right, so we're ready for our last cuts. So I'm turning it, and again, just have my fingers tucked under, 1/4 inch, walking my fingers back, and my thumb is actually holding the onion so the onion doesn't slide, and I'm walking back, but these fingers are keeping my knife from getting to my thumb. And if I'm ever pushing things off my knife, I'm pushing it away from the blade. I'm not getting my fingers in front of the knife. If you feel uncomfortable with that, you can also use your scraper. You can scrape on the edge of your cutting board. What I don't want you to do is I don't want you to take the blade of your knife and use that to scrape. A lot of people will do that. That's a good way to dull your knife. And if you don't have a scraper and you want to use something as a scraper, you want to use your knife as a scraper, that's just what you're used to, try and remember to flip it over and use the blunt side and use that as a scraper so you can kind of scrape things off to the side. Now I'm just going to show you a different size to show you that this technique is really translatable to any size. So I have another onion. Just going to shave off that root end. And if you use your knife, again, you can scrape those little bits off with the dull end. Cut it in half through the root end. Peel off that outer layer. And really anything that looks bad. Be nice, firm, crunchy. You shouldn't have any mushy, soggy parts of the onion that you're keeping. It's also nice to have a towel around just to be able to dry your hand. If your hand gets wet, it can slide more. Also clean up your workspace with a clean towel. Now I'll do more of a medium dice, like a 1/2 inch dice. Large dice, I won't repeat that one, but that would just be an inch size. I'll show you a couple of other types of slices as well. So now we'll do medium dice. And this one, I mean, there's really, basically we're just going to do 2 layers. This is a pretty small onion. So we'll go a 1/2 inch apart. Turn that, and then we'll do 1/2 inch again. When I was in, I'm sure most chefs have this experience in culinary school. Your chef instructors would get out a ruler and measure your pieces, and if they didn't measure up exactly the way you wanted, then you have to start over. We're not that precise. The reason that you care, you might wonder, well, I've been chopping onions for decades and they're not perfectly the same size. Why do I even care? Why should I learn this? If you're just pureeing or food processing something, it doesn't really matter if things are exactly the same size. But if you're cooking, then it's really nice to have a pretty uniform size because all the pieces cook at the same rate. If you don't want them to cook at the same rate, then don't chop them the same size. But most of the time you do, so that's why this is helpful. So small dice, medium dice, and large dice would just be bigger. Some people will say large dice is 3/4 of an inch square. Other people will say an inch. It's whatever you want it to be, I would say. And then I'm going to do some slices. So I'm just going to use a red onion for this. You can do this with any type of onion. I just tend to use red onion in these cuts more than I use white onion. That's why I'm showing you. And so I'm just going to shave off the end of the onion. See, this gets very repetitive. Cut down through the root end. But that's good. That means there's not that many steps to learn, right? It's tricky to start. Once you get the hang of it, it'll be like riding a bike. And some people, if your onion skin or the peel on garlic is stuck on, some people also use their paring knife to kind of get under the edge of it. So that's another tip. If you don't have nails or you can't grab it with your fingers, you can use your paring knife to get under the edge. Okay. So we have our 2/2 of a red onion, and I'm going to show a thin slice and a sauté slice. So sometimes the thin slice is called salad slice, partly because it's the thin slice you would use if you were trying to put some red onion in a salad. So what I'm going to do, this is where it's really important, keep those fingers tucked under. This is also the point at which if you have glasses, you probably start crying chopping onions because all that nice onion aroma gets under your lenses. But I'm basically trying to make as thin of slice as possible. So I'm just holding it, so it's just going to be paper thin. If you can almost see through it, all the better. You might have to practice to get them really thin, and you can kind of gauge as you walk your fingers back how much you walk them back to make it really thin. So you really want, if I hold it up, you can almost see some of the light through it. I don't know if you can see that on video, but I can certainly see that the light shining through it a bit. And you want those really thin slices for any preparations you're going to have your onion raw. I don't know if you've ever gotten a big piece of onion in a salad or, in some other dish. It's just really takes over the whole flavor in your mouth, right? You can't taste anything else. It's really unpleasant. So when thinking about how to chop something, also think about what it will be used for. So these really thin slices would be nice in a salad or raw preparation or a quick pickle. And then a sauté slice is the opposite. So this is actually where we do cut off the root end. So I'll repeat, we cut off the root end for this one. So I'm going to cut that off. I'm cutting it off at an angle. And the reason I'm doing that is I just don't waste as much onion. So the root is kind of like it kind of domes in at the end of the onion, so you have to get all of that out. All right, so now I have no root. All of this is edible. And for a sauté slice, I think of it being like a rainbow. So I'm going to make slices that are going like this, progressively around, and keep my fingers tucked under. And you want these to be thicker slices. The reason why is, as the name would suggest, saute, is that we'd want to cook this. And whereas with small dice, we might want to, saute that in some oil, have it get translucent, kind of melt into the dish and not really stand out. A saute slice is where you actually want some bite of the onion. We're going to cook it to take away some of that sharpness, but we actually want that crunch left. And if you have these really thin pieces, you try and cook it, it just melts, melts into the dish. This is where you want, like in a stir fry, you want that piece of onion preserved. So. So I do anywhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch for this. It really just depends on how long you're going to cook it, what you're going to use it for. When I get about halfway, I turn the onion and then start on the other side. And you don't have to have your fingers all the way touching the knife as you start. It's a little bit awkward to do that. You just want them where if you slip, you can't cut yourself. And then once you get up here, then you're really needing them for stability, so you start using them again. And then here you can see I'm actually holding, fingers and thumbs. So you end up getting used to like having your other fingers stabilize whenever you're cooking so it can't slip out from under you. And then if it slides, look, it slipped. I pulled my hand back, no harm done. And you can get in there and get a couple more slices out of that if you want. If you're good and find that you can keep it stable. If you're not yet that confident in your skills, then don't finish chopping those last few slices. It's okay. Here we have our small dice, medium dice, thin slice or salad slice, and saute slice.